I recognize two general approaches to aesthetics, which are the analytic and the speculative. Indicative of analytic philosophy, the analytic approach to aesthetics sees art objects as the product of human labor, embedded in institutions and projecting towards universal marks of achievement, such as beauty. Analytic art has signatures, meaning it pairs art objects with artists who self-identify with artistry. This approach to art is found in education and exhibitions, and because of that, has value, but only a limited value as a standard for certain linguistic games in which art is discoursed. But possible discourse around art extends beyond the narrow entrapment of analytic aesthetics into the speculative realm. Speculative aesthetics sees the full breadth of what aesthetics has to offer by removing socially useful conventions for classifying aesthetic experiences. Is a flower a work of art? As an aesthetic experience, the flower exists within the extrapolated range of art beyond the fine. Speculative aesthetics detaches the mind from classification to focus entirely on the aesthetic experience and its intrinsic value. It is the speculative approach to aesthetics that I will analyze here, for it is the more fruitful and enriching of the two approaches. Too much effort in aesthetics is dedicated to attempting to define what art is. Such an endeavor is not only futile, but meaningless in origin. The term art is not a natural kind that can be derived from empirical observation and testing. Instead, it is a contingent word emerging descriptively from cultural usage. A descriptive term should in turn be understood descriptively. Some people say art is that which causes pleasure. Others say it is the product of emotional expression. Some people say art is found in nature. Others say it must be man-made. But any one definition of art ignores the varied practical ways in which art is experienced and used, and undermines the source of the word. The organic emergence of language does not operate like a science, and words can develop to encompass multiple conflicting definitional properties. The only hope for definitions of art is to define subcategories or aspects of the term, which can aid in specificity but cannot replace the common usage of the term altogether, nor should it. Expressivism is the concept that art is defined in terms of expression of emotion in the artist and audience. The theory is criticized as naive because some art is the product of emotion while some other art is not. But this criticism only works if expressivism is taken as the sole definition of art. Why is it that philosophers seek to define absolute definitions for words which cannot possibly have them? Expressivism is valuable as one theory of art amongst many, each with their own role to play in describing the multifaceted nature of the word art. Emotions play a role in some works of art and not in others, but seeking an absolute definition of art would remove emotion from the picture altogether, something that contrasts with the sentiments of many great artists for whom emotional expression is the prime aim of art. There is more value to be had in describing art than in defining it. The same applies to hedonism. While pleasure is prototypically associated with artistic experience, plenty of artworks forego pleasure in search of the other emotions. People enjoy crying at tragedies, and although we might say they experience a pleasure in that crying, it would be counterintuitive to define art in terms of only dominant intended audience response. And certainly aesthetics, when viewed speculatively, encompasses many experiences with any kind of emotional response, whether positive or negative. When we appreciate art within the full breadth of its speculative reach, it becomes clear that art is what I call a pan-predicative block. The uncarved block carries inside it all possibilities, such that anything carvable is predicable of the block. In this way, anything and everything is capable of being called art through predication. We could say that for all X, X is art. This definition, although accurate, has limited communicative value, which is why the word art carves out a meaning through contextualization. A banana taped to a wall can be art if contextualization carves out a space for it within the overall pan-predicative block, or it can be disqualified as art if no such contextualization exists. A language game generates its own rules by using words that contextualize and recontextualize the structure of discourse. At its most general, art is everything, but as it is instantiated in discourse, it takes on eliminative properties that carve out its semantic address. In this way, we see that the analytic approach to art is a language game contained within the speculative approach to art. When defining art in a language game, one should be aware of other potentially pan-predicative blocks. Suppose art is defined as something that does not occur in nature. This appears at first to carve the block that is art, but it only contextualizes art within another unqualified pan-predicative block, nature. Just like how everything is art, everything is nature. Only the transcendent could be unnatural, but the transcendent cannot be coherently spoken about at all. Thus, humans and their creations are a part of nature. There is nothing outside of nature. The Mona Lisa, the Campbell's soup can, and the Eiffel Tower are all the products of nature, as in they are possibilities within the uncarved block that is nature. We could then refine the definition by saying that art is that which is designed. Conventional art objects are the product of human design and not random chance. But suppose one were to assess the arthood of an archaeological artifact in which the human intention is unknown. Is it designed? For much of history, the West viewed the entire world as the product of design through the lens of Abrahamic religion. But developments in evolutionary theory provide us with a world created by a blind watchmaker. The natural processes of the world actively design the world, but without an agent or plan behind their actions. We see that when we specify what art is, antinomies appear that fuel the language game to develop further. The dialectic of a language game like this might synthesize to the conclusion that art does not require an artist, but is nonetheless the product of design. Because art is a pan-predicative block, it is like an effect without a cause. Art encompasses all phenomena like pure possibility and lacks a solid place within the world. The language game I choose to use when discussing aesthetics is that of media. Media is a better word than art for capturing the aims of aesthetics. Media embodies the appropriate scope of the speculative approach to aesthetics for defining what aesthetic experiences are and are about. Media is a twofold thing. It always entails both the media itself and the medium it exists within. The human agent itself is a vessel or medium in which aesthetic experiences arise as content. The categories of medium and message, or form and content, are the structure of media. According to Marshall McLuhan, the content of any medium is always another medium, showing how these categories are nested within each other and emerge from each other. There is no message without a medium, and there is no medium without a message. McLuhan defines the medium as any extension of ourselves. This places the human agent at the center of the media experience and contextualizes the media within the constraints of physicality, embodiment, intentionality, and phenomenology. Media facilitates the audience becoming one with the media phenomenon through extension. The medium and message discussed by McLuhan are the equiprimordial constitution of a piece of media. For an entity to be classified as a piece of media, its human extensionality must interface with the structuring principles of the world. Aristotle developed the doctrine of hylomorphism to explain the same relation but within the application of physical objects. Hylomorphism states that physical objects are comprised of form and matter, which function concurrently to actuate the object in the world. An object must be made of something, which is its matter or content. But content is not sensible without a shape that contains it. These two elements apply to media entities just as much as to physical objects. However, in the media context in which entities are communicated and embedded in experience, they can be interpreted with the terms medium and message. Medium and message are a union, and as equiprimordial elements of the media entity, neither can be divorced from the other. Despite this fundamental principle of media constitutionality, a dominant strand of aesthetic theory, indicative of the analytic approach to art, attempts to segregate form and content and elevate one over the other. This lineage of aesthetic theory is called formalism and originates from Immanuel Kant and his work Critique of Judgment. The formalist tradition honors the concept of significant form when making judgments of an aesthetic entity. This disposition entails a futile enactment of ignorance of content and ignores the interconnected and nested nature of medium and message that must always both be present to fulfill the hylomorphic structure of entities. Formalism favors aesthetics in form alone, which is an unnecessary restriction that artificially separates the natural union and interplay of content and form in aesthetic experiences. Not only is formalism misguided in that it abandons a significant aspect of aesthetic experience, but it is functionally impossible and theoretically incoherent. For an example of this impossibility, consider the roles of form and content in the context of listening to spoken language. As media, spoken language is comprised of content and form. The form of spoken language is described by phonetics and acoustics, in which audible vibrations are structured physically and linguistically. The content of spoken language can be described by semantics, in which the phonetic occurrences are registered as instances of meaning. The problem occurs when trying to hear someone speak in one's native language and not understand it. This task defies the natural and intuitive process of any linguistically fluent human, in which the very sense impression of spoken language is processed into meaning more automatically than one breathes air. Resistance to the message of incoming language only strains the process and makes the meaning of the words all the more apparent. The same automatic processing of content is present when simply looking upon an object. When one looks at, say, an apple, one already knows that it is an apple. Appleness is a message that the object emanates, and apple is a category the mind projects, and these reciprocal presentations of meaning operate without any conscious intention. Phenomenology relies on the concept of intentionality to analyze the way experience is typically aimed at an aboutness, and when an apple is intended upon, it is undoubtedly understood to be an apple. These two examples, which are fundamental modes of media engagement, demonstrate how content is inseparable from form when the nature of phenomenal experience and its embodiment are understood. To hear spoken language and not understand it, or to gaze upon an object and not classify it, would require an inhuman level of meditative power. Beyond the phenomenological entanglement of form and content in the media experience, form and content cannot be fully separated even in theoretical analysis. This is because the form of a media entity at one level of analysis may be the content of the same entity at another level of analysis. This nested relationship can be understood through the medium of the novel. When formalists analyze a novel, they fall into the temptation to assess its message and medium at an immediately recognizable scope that clouds their comprehension of how form and content interrelate across scope. That is to say, when analyzing a novel, one should recursively consider not just the apparent medium, such as being a novel, but also the meta-mediums that contain and contextualize that medium. At the broadest scope of analysis, the particular novel can be understood as a technological and historical artifact. The most general medium the novel is embedded within is history itself. The novel, as a physical object, could not exist if it was not created by historical forces that define the structural possibilities of it as a book. In this way, history is the medium of the novel, and the physicality of the manifest book is the historical message or content. The content of the physical form of the media entity must be accessed in order to reveal itself as form carrying with it more nested content. The medium of a message is the meta-message of formal containment. The next most definite scope of analysis contained within the media entity as a historical artifact is the medium of material and efficient actuality. The novel artifact has the content of physicality, and the physicality itself is a medium with formal characteristics. The physical book has the shape of a book, with pages made of paper bound together at the spine. This physical form would be insufficient for defining the entity as a book if it were not for the content of written language presented on the pages. It is because the book has both the physical form of bound pages and the typographic content of language that the overall entity can be considered a book at all. Within the medium of language, which is the content of the physical novel being considered, there exists the semantic content of words signified by linguistic form. This is the next level of nested mediums. The particular linguistic units of the novel's language are determined by diction. In semiotic terminology, diction is the author's paradigmatic selection of words. For example, fantastic may be substituted for wonderful with minimal drift in meaning, and this change in content has no bearing on the syntagmatic and syntactical formal structure of the language. Despite this, the syntax hosting the choice of diction constitutes the content of the novel when considered physically. The appearance of language on the page consists of marks or shapes, which get their form from historical contingency. But when processed as linguistic phenomena, those marks take on the role of structuration called syntax. When the semantics of the novel are considered in itself, it transforms from a message to a medium. The semantic message of a novel in its totality is considered a plot or story structure. The plot is the form of the story, which is comprised of episodic events and characters as content. Each event itself is structured with form as a necessary means for facilitating content. Characters can be analyzed archetypically to understand their formal relationship to broader categorical affordances of humanity, but this is only possible because of the instantiated messaging of the actions of the characters. The story and events of the novel only have existence insofar as they are phenomena. Written language carries meaning only in its potentiality because its message must be unlocked by a literate agent who reads it. The nested medium containing the semantic message is the mind itself, which is the immaterial substrate of all phenomena. Media is only media when it is experience, and all experiences are content on a person's phenomenal field. When the novel is actually read and experienced as media, it must be structured by the mind and processed in terms of the categories. The mind affords the possibility of experience, and all experiences take the form of phenomena. The message of an instantiated episode of narrative manifests through the formal structuring of the mind into linguistic sense, the ultimate content populating the aesthetic experience itself. This analysis of the medium of the novel generalizes to other mediums, which can always be understood through the nested containment of mediums and messages. Media is the extension of man, and it projects and receives man, engaging him through his phenomenal apparatus, mediating both the self and other. For John Dewey, the actual work of art is what the art product does with and in experience. The root scope of analysis is always the phenomenal experience, which terminates the analysis in sense impression. But beyond sense data, media extends into the world and is embodied in mediums. Kant proposed, through the lens of formalism he developed, the idea that art should be appreciated through what he called the free play of the imagination, without concepts. Kant wants one to not understand an art piece through concepts, which classify the content of a piece with meaning. But as was demonstrated through the analysis of the novel, this goal is not practical. The message of a medium is another medium. The medium of a message is another message. So the strictly formal elements of the art object cannot even be identified for appreciation. A poem without content, or in a foreign language, is valid as rhyming gibberish, but no one would choose to engage with the medium of poetry in this way. Dewey asks us, in regard to the poem Lucy Gray, did anybody who felt the poem aesthetically make, at the same time, a conscious distinction of sense and thought, of matter and form? If so, they did not read or hear aesthetically, for the aesthetic value of the stanzas lies in the integration of the two. The form of an art piece is possible in Kant's system because of the categories that structure experience. But Kant only recognized categories of a broad and general nature. Categories are nested through containment logic, such that a tree of branching categories ranges from the general to the particular. What this means is that a category like quality branches through categorical operations towards the particular instantiated qualities of an object, which are themselves categories. An apple has the general categorical property of color as a quality, but it also has the particular red color instantiated in it that is itself a category. Categories structure experience, but are also the experience structured, such that categories are both form and content. The evasion of concepts is a part of Kant's doctrine of disinterestedness. According to Kant, desire is the source of interest in an art object, and it obscures the pure form of the art object. Despite this, Kant has no problem with pleasure, and in fact makes pleasure central to his theory of aesthetics. For Kant, pleasure is the basis of aesthetic judgments, and he defines beauty as follows. The beautiful is that which, apart from concepts, is represented as the object of universal delight. This distinction does not take into consideration that pleasure itself is something desired. As a construct, pleasure does not necessitate being desired except for within the socially imposed culture of normativity. Pleasure is a concept. No sensory experience can be considered pleasurable until evaluated as such with a concept. Therefore, Kant's entire model dissolves into contradiction. Kant's book is divided into an analysis of the beautiful and the sublime. Other modes of aesthetic engagement are disqualified from consideration, which restricts aesthetics to a narrow range of experience. When aesthetics requires pleasure in the beautiful, all aesthetics collapses into normative standards. Kant writes about the opposite of pleasure with, "One kind of ugliness alone is incapable of being represented conformably to nature without destroying all aesthetic delight, and consequently artistic beauty, namely, that which excites disgust." If aesthetics includes only the beautiful, then what is to be made of horror films, which indulge in the disgusting to great artistic ends? While a formalist may judge a horror film based on the beauty of its formal structure, the purposiveness of horror is found within its concepts as the basis for the excitation of fear. Horror fans desire fear, and for them, fear is an aesthetic experience no less valuable than beauty. Even when art and media are seen through the lens of aestheticism, which favors beauty, beauty is not severable from human desire. Beauty is not an essence, living disembodied in the realm of Platonic forms. It is a faculty of the living creature, with an origin in biology. Humans are attracted to things favorable to humans evolutionarily, and this condition colors the domain of beautiful things. For evidence of this, one only has to look to the subject matter of art as curated by art institutions. People are attracted to images of the opposite sex. Why else would so many famous paintings be of Venuses? As the feminist art group Guerrilla Girls points out, less than 3% of the artists in the modern art section of the Met Museum are women, but 83% of the nudes are female. It might be argued that the Met Museum lacks proper aesthetic judgment in its curation, but this would only undermine the history of, and the status of, critics and curators. A Venus, as a woman, is always the content of a painting, but it gives the painting its characteristic form and interest. An equally proportional and harmonious painting of a non-human subject matter, or a clothed subject, would not elicit the same response, because of the importance of interest in content. This is why art should be subsumed under the category of media, which is always interested. Media extends the human condition, and a Venus interests the viewing subject as an extension of the genitals and sexual orientation. Disinterestedness is a fiction. The contingency of beauty may lead one to believe that media is subjective, but neither subjectivity nor objectivity, in the traditional sense of the words, are meaningful ways to classify media. Formalism is a flawed attempt to understand media objectively. While Kant considers art to be subjective, in the sense that it relies upon non-logical judgments, he also claims that subjective judgments of beauty are universalizable. This effectively undermines the term subjective, and usurps it through the conception of objectivity through a cowardice in the face of relativity. When someone tries to speak objectively about media, or attempts to universalize it, they are defaulting to a generalized human, which is not truly essential. Because media is ultimately an experience, the media object is irrelevant to aesthetics and is merely an objective cause. Experience is private, immaterial, and unitary within the viewing subject. Even if every human found a given media piece to be beautiful, that would not reach the level of universal, as the aesthetic preferences of gorillas, dogs, and worms must also be considered. The biological basis of experience lacks an essence existing across all instantiated beings, and therefore has no universal basis for judgment. Beyond the impossibility of universality, absolutism is not even to be desired in aesthetics. It is because of the plurality of judging agents that the world is colored with a variety of perspectives that not only appreciate media differently, but also work to generate a diversity of media from each individual's unique cognitive makeup. Subject and object can better be understood as phenomenological principles for categorization. Subjectivity is that which pertains to subjects, and objectivity is that which pertains to objects. Every media entity carries with it both subjective and objective features, as every media entity is structured through these principles. Just like how the human is both a subject and an object, media exists both as an object cause and as a subjective experience. Media is the extension of man, and categories are how they extend. The world has a structure as understood through the categories. It is because of this structure that the world is sensible and life as we know it is possible. But structure is also the basis for constraint. The categorical nature of space-time and embodied materiality constrain possibilities of both thought and actuality. A person can imagine a unicorn by taking their conception of a horse and a horn and pasting them together in the mind. But this act of imagination is only possible because both the horse and the horn are possible. Imagination cannot extend itself beyond the categorical structure of the world to imagine things that are not only physically impossible, but categorically impossible. Because possibility is constrained by the categories, possibility is bound. Elements of possibility may be combined recursively, like language ad infinitum, but possibility is only infinite in expansion. Possibility is bound to an origin like a vector. Media is an expression of possibility, and therefore exists within the map of possibility space. This is the basis for art as knowledge. Everything that can exist exists prior to existentiality by being a part of possibility space. Thus, nothing can be invented, only discovered. Fire is a discovery derived from the possibilities of contact between wood and flint, in the same way that the computer is a discovery from the possibilities of the logic of gates and transistors. Every invention is an actualization of possibilities afforded by the categories. The process of discovery is also the structure of aesthetic innovation. The picture plane of a canvas and the chemical formulations of the pigment are the constraints on which the medium of painting is based. And like an uncarved block, the constraints express the affordances of possibility within the medium. Every original painting is a node in the possibility space of painting, and the institution of painting as a whole is the collective cartography of that space. Cartography applies to all forms of human knowledge, including false knowledge. A false hypothesis provides cartographic value as an exploration of possibility. Works of media cannot be either true or false in the conventional sense, but even bad media exist to chart possibilities of expression. Knowledge and information exist as one and the same map of existence. It is a flaw to locate the knowledge of art in cognition, because although cognition is what processes information into knowledge, knowledge is a correspondence with the reality of informational possibility. Knowledge is derived from information, not by valuation or truthhood, but by a categorical correlation. Raw information is comprised of empty signifiers that have yet to be processed into meaning. This is exemplary of firstness. Information becomes knowledge when it takes on the form of sign-object correlation, in which secondness manifests to relate that information to the world it corresponds to. Lastly, there is wisdom, which itself is derived from knowledge. When knowledge is interpreted with sign-object-interpretant correlation in a state of thirdness, its breadth of meaning expands beyond simple correspondence and into symbolic synthesis. In order to analyze a piece of media, we first have to know what it is as an entity. Every piece of media is an entity of some sort, but an entity should not be understood as a speculative thing beyond sensation. Although media entities often have corresponding physical objects as reference, what concerns the aesthetician is only their phenomenal existence. When someone views the Mona Lisa, they are absorbing the object into their sensory apparatus and entifying the art object into perceptible media with aesthetic qualities. The same goes for the other senses, including the senses related to physicality. The Mona Lisa is an object that can be touched. It can be stroked, poked, thrown, or smashed. And each of these events are aesthetic because they are sensory experiences. When inquiring into the nature of a piece of media, we must understand its physical existence only insofar as it is granted by sensation. Aristotle discovered a way to analyze what something is in the form of the four causes: formal, material, efficient, and final. This is a system in which something's being is defined in terms of what caused it, or what it is the effect of. This is valuable, but Aristotle has a more interesting system that accomplishes similar aims in the form of the categories. What is the category substance, if not just the material cause with more metaphysical baggage? Given that the four causes could themselves be considered categories in their own right, it seems right to synthesize these approaches into a single categorical system that will serve us in analyzing the beinghood of media. The new system of categories places media at the center from which the categories pour forth. The media is phenomenal, and in this way is a part of the senses that comprise the self. But the senses arise from what is other than the self. The media is embedded in a world, even the I world, which means it exists within the structuring principles of cause and effect. Self other, cause, and effect are the categories, and they stem from the media itself because the media partakes of them by being them. The media is a cause. The media is an effect. The media is a self. The media is an other. This predicative relationship facilitates the categorical growth of specificity and particularity, as categories branch out of the media and demarcate the features of beinghood the media discloses. Self will branch to the bottom right, other will branch to the bottom left, cause will branch to the top left, and effect will branch to the top right. Even as a phenomenon, the Mona Lisa has an existence both within the self and other as categorically determined. The visual qualia the Mona Lisa presents is identifiable with the self as the result of mentation, and so are one's judgments about it. But this categorization is coextensive with the instantiated object of the media piece, which is other. Within the sensory totality of phenomenal existence, there arises various others, including the environment the media is situated within. The Mona Lisa, if viewed in original form, entails the media environment which situates the media piece within the museum and its contextual apparatus. This worldly context enters into the experience of the Mona Lisa, though it is intelligibly separable from the absorption into self of the viewing experience. The Mona Lisa that appears as the self in the phenomenal existence is the effect both of the media object causing the phenomenon and the personal bodily activity that manifests the mind in which the media presents itself. In this way, the media is both cause and effect, as every effect is also a cause and vice versa. The four categories discussed are the first scope in the branching of categories that each will themselves branch into. Beginning with the self, this category breaks apart into degree and modality. Degree is the ontological instantiation of a phenomenon as sense data. For something to be media, it must be sensible in some way, and degree is the affirmation of that sensibility. The Mona Lisa instantiates itself within the self by disclosing its ontology to the self with degree. But degree is only understood in its manifest existence in which it is embodied in modality. The presence of degree must come with sensory qualities that bestow upon the degree properties. Color, odor, and taste are examples of how phenomena actuate themselves by taking on phenomenal characteristics. The Mona Lisa appears on the self as an assortment of color and other qualia that designate its beinghood as a media experience. Moving to the bottom left, other branches into transform and definition. Like how degree and modality populated the mental phenomenal space of the self, transform and definition give the media an existence as an other in space. The transform is the position in space of the media, which consists of values, like that of a point on a Cartesian plane. For a piece of media to be, it must be there, as in somewhere. But media objects do not just live in space, they occupy space. This is why the values of the transform are populated and therefore defined. The definition of the media is what allows one to receive a media object as existent, because it is what fills in the transform and extends into its context. The Mona Lisa has a transform that positions it on a wall in a museum and allocates a potential for form along the plane that makes up its canvas. The canvas is a defined object, meaning it has extension in space and a definite form. The paint along the canvas is tactile, even if only subtly, such that paint uses definition to extend beyond and into the canvas. The Mona Lisa is a media object with form because of its transform and definition, and we know that only because it was sensible through the phenomenal appearance of degree and modality, the qualia which lives on and with the form. As we progress through the categories, the media at the center gains a higher degree of reality as it becomes situated within the world. The next step is cause in the top left, which branches into material and efficiency. Like how definition fills in the transform, material fills in the definition while giving it more dimensionality. Material is speculative in nature, because it can only be known by projecting beinghood behind the sensibility of degree and modality. But a media object, like the Mona Lisa, defines its own definition by populating the form of the media with material beinghood. The Mona Lisa is made of oil pigment on a canvas made of poplar wood. The material existence of the media is contextualized by efficiency. The material form came into existence at the hands of the artist, Leonardo da Vinci, and the canvas and paints were sourced from craftsmen and industry. These are the efficient causes of the Mona Lisa, and together with the material that was manipulated in the efficiency, comprise the cause of the Mona Lisa. The last source of categorical being to consider at this scope is the branches of effect, which are finality and affordance. Much like how cause situates the other in a physical world, effect situates the self in a mental world. Finality is the actuality of the media, which is understood as the media affirming itself as itself. The actuality of finality is positioned within a larger field of possibility known as affordance. The affordances of the media are what it can do and what can be done to it. Possibility projects off of the actuality of media and in turn modifies it by actualizing through negation. The Mona Lisa manifests finality as it serves its purpose as an aesthetic object, which affords the possibility of viewing. Other affordances include taking photos of the Mona Lisa, but its context as a priceless object in a museum does not afford possibilities like touching or tasting. A media entity is made into an entity through the process of categorization. Prior to entification, no phenomena has the properties of media. Entifying phenomena involves classifying through association. The categories conduct classification by sorting by subject and object. Objectification assigns the properties of objects to phenomena. It clusters together the discrete, finite, contingent, and physical. Subjectification assigns the properties of subjects to phenomena. It clusters together the indiscrete, unbound, essential, and mental. These principles of association are the generalized duality of root scope in the categorical structure that generates media entities. The other is made through objectification, and the self through subjectification. The other is an object only potentially within a mind, which is the product of speculation. This is unlike the self, which is subjective in its sensory receptiveness. The self is the product of categorical discrimination no less than the other, for both have to be delineated from the same phenomenal field, the former from subjectification and the latter from objectification. The cause is objectification, because it gives the media its ontic composition and historicity in the physical world. The effect is subjectification, because it essentializes the media into the actuality of the affirmative nature of affection. It positions the media with the self by affording the possibility of experience in the self. Objectifying causes an entity to assert beinghood, and subjectification contextualizes that being in sensibility. This pattern can be seen in how the branches of the next scope are classified. Degree is an objectification because it originates phenomenal existence. Modality subjectifies degree by giving it plurality in an existence with properties. Transform, like degree, is the source of being and is therefore the product of objectification. Definition populates the transform through subjectification by pluralizing the point into a shape. Materiality comes from objectification, because by assigning material to a phenomenon, one is turning it into an object. Efficiency locates the media on a timeline, which subjectifies the material by subjecting it to generation and corruption. Finality is an objectification because it asserts a medium of being, and affordance subjectifies that medium by extrapolating on the context of possible actualization. With all of the relevant categories laid out, general characteristics of the system can be discovered. The region of the self can be called the qualia of the media. Media manifests as sensory phenomena, and through qualia, they can be known. The region of the other is the shape of the media. Transform and definition work together to provide the form of what is sensed as qualia, which constitutes a shape. The region of cause can be considered composition, because it extends form into a composition of material parts. The region of effect can be interpreted as the telos of the media. Finality can be understood as the purpose of the media, but purpose is always known through actuality. Actuality makes sense because it is situated in the possibility of affordance, and together they mark the teleological dimension of the media. The downward direction is identifiable with the process of reception. Qualia and shape are received by the senses intuitively and without additional effort. This is opposed to the upward direction of projection. Composition and telos are not automatically received from the media, but have to be projected onto it through the process of identification. The leftward direction shows the existence of the media, whereas the rightward direction shows the essence of the media. Shape and composition are all that exist for the strict materialist, but qualia and telos are undeniable parts of the phenomenal experience of media concerning the essences beyond physicality. Media entities are categorical entities. Media entities can only be considered entities because they are subject to the categories. Categories are how art is defined within language games, and media is the aesthetic entity that provides the widest view of the categories. Like how language games emergently define aesthetics, history shapes the uncarved block of aesthetics within a dialectical media landscape. Painting is the prototypical medium of art, which favors qualia and shape as its dominant categories. Much of the art world, including education, is devoted to paintings, and because of this, qualia and shape become the primary modes of aesthetic engagement. Consider the advance of video games, which led analytically oriented people to exclude this new medium from the domain of art. Even though video games feature the hallmark categories of art in the form of qualia and shape, the addition of affordance as a category of aesthetic engagement was too categorically divergent from the precedent of art's history. Beyond painting, sculpture extends shape into composition by providing a stage of material inefficiency in the form of objects as media. While paintings are physical objects with material existence, they do not use physicality within their message. Sculpture emanates its materiality as a part of the intentional media experience. Mechanical technology, as media, is built upon composition. Machines extend the human form to enact material effects that actively shape their efficient link to the world. The telos of finality and affordance are a part of physical media as well as digital media. Interactive design, like video games or applications more broadly, affords the possibility of interactive media experiences that translate actions into finality. We can also consider what an aesthetic experience is when there is only telos. Plato considered the form of beauty to be beautiful itself, and Platonic forms are pure affordance and finality, an essence without an existence. If beauty is beautiful, then perception, like qualia, may not be a necessary element of aesthetics. However, contemplating the beautiful is an aesthetic experience only insofar as the contemplation is media. It is because of the categories of cause and effect that media entities have historicity. The canons of various subjects are often demarcated by lineage, such as being Western. This is because media entities exist as physical objects comprised of material and extended into efficiency. Material media lives on past the aesthetic experience to continue affecting the world. One artist viewing a painting will realize the new aesthetic affordances that inspiration can manifest. It is the projecting capacity of media that allows for lineage, memory, and progression. Because of the progression of mediums, that is to say technology, lineages have converged all into one. McLuhan noticed in the 1960s that electric media was connecting the world into a global village. Media communication in the internet age is instantaneous and international, and people therefore have fewer boundaries than ever. The expansion of communication can be seen when the West received Japanese prints with the changing historical circumstances leading to the Meiji Restoration. When Japan opened up, the integrity of the Western art canon shuffled and had to accommodate to new types of media experience. Thus, two lineages merged, and new affordances were actualized in the form of influence. We would not have Van Gogh in the form we have him if it was not for these contingent historical and technological developments that themselves involve the manipulation of media. Affordance and finality are key to understanding the relationship of medium to message, and the structure of media ontology. In the same way as how in Platonism, beautiful things partake of the beautiful by being instances, the structure of media's ontology parallels a principle of object-oriented programming, which is division into class and instance. In programming, classes hold all of the information necessary for creating an object, like a prototype that never itself gets instantiated. Instances are created when the prototypical class is instantiated with values and has an existence of its own. Classes can be children or parents, meaning they are layered in a complex web of digital ontology. In semiotics, the closest version of this concept is the type and token. A type is a class, and a token is an instance. Ferdinand de Saussure broke down linguistics into the parole, the instantiated tokens of language use, and the langue, the structural body acting as the type from which the parole gets its integrity. The langue is a medium in which parole is the message. Each instance of speech act is also itself a medium that, as an instance, contains a message. This media relationship extends to other mediums, including the typical art mediums. The ability to create tokens of visual art is the result of technological innovation from the woodblock printing process to the modern digital printer, although copying was practiced before printing, such as in Roman reproductions of Greek originals. Reproduction allows for there to be an original at all. When reproductions are made, they invoke the token type relationship by creating new instances of what becomes a type. This also has wider affordances for how media is consumed by democratizing the means of experiencing media by allowing everyone to partake of a token. The object-oriented structure of media also serves dialectical aims. Because media is reproduced, it is preserved, and even if the original type is destroyed, the media survives. This extends the lifespan of a media entity indefinitely and removes a source of cultural amnesia. Many ancient texts, including the Bible or the Pali Canon, lack a root type because the original was destroyed or there never was a strict original to begin with. Reproduction leads to degradation, but this constraint is solved by the digital file. A JPEG will degrade from compression if saved over and over, but storing media as abstract data allows for transferability and preservability unparalleled by physical media. The token-type relationship is most evident in music. A musical performance is a token of the recording, which is the type. Before the invention of recorded media, the type of the musical performance was restricted to sheet music, but recording preserves the authentic form of the music medium. The recording radically altered the affordance of engaging in auditory media at all, by eliminating the need for musicians to have music. Music now permeates culture by filling air in the home, the car, and in public areas like stores. People are now saturated with music tokens, but this media innovation also threatens the structure of patronage in music. Streaming eliminated the music store and massively undervalued the monetizability of recorded music. This results in music performance tokens being the primary source of revenue compared to album types. The music that cannot be experienced as a token of a recording is improvised music. Improvised music has no source from which it is based, and generates its medium by being a message. Like how sheet music alters the form of music, a script preserves the type of a play, without preserving the properties of actuality of a performance. A script is the message of a play, without the formal medium of performance. While people do read plays, no one would opt for reading films. Movies used to have originals in the form of tape, but now movies have no strict originals. Movies are tokens without a type, or a type without tokens. A movie captures a performance, but cannot itself be performed. It is an entity unto its own. This analysis is, of course, only applicable to a certain scope of the medium of film, as at another scope, the playback instances of a film are still tokens of the film as an idea. When a media entity becomes a type, it becomes a category. Society organizes itself around media entities, and media entities shape our collective understanding of the world. Canonhood creates types even while it tries to elevate token originals. The societal engagement with types and tokens is demonstrated most poignantly by the Campbell soup cans of Andy Warhol. Soup is media, and is integrated into a larger media system consisting of metallic containers, branding, and economic architecture. By exhibiting a Campbell soup can as the sole focus of a fine art piece, Warhol is using one medium, the visual image, to analyze and recontextualize another medium, food. But this simple change in the content of visual art has the effect of destabilizing the conventions of art and places them within the broader mediums of social organization. The advanced mechanical technology of mass production affords the endless reproduction of tokens, all sharing in a type. Each Campbell's soup can is a virtually identical token, even as they are filled with edible particularity. Warhol simply extends the inevitable developments of media into the space of fine art by recreating the process of mass production, and he does this while cheekily expressing this formal idea in the content that is a soup can. Warhol's studio was called a factory, and it lived up to that name by producing a series of soup can images all alike in content. As media explodes in tokens and implodes in types, Warhol demonstrates that art is just another medium capable of mass production. In the age of mass production and reproduction, where a soup can be art, the distinction between fine art and folk art is not only elitist, but functionally outdated. Mass production has eliminated the traditional distinction between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Prior to industrialization, the elite enjoyed unique media experiences afforded by wealth and power. When every meal was a particular, without ties to branding, superior sustenance and preparation of food was allotted to those who could pay for it. But now, even the rich eat Campbell's soup. The wealthy partake of the same homogeneously mass-produced packaged food, television shows, paperback books, and Hollywood movies as the rest of the society they live within. A Spotify subscription costs the same for an average person and for an elite, and it affords the same totality of media experiences. Wealth, beyond what is available to the middle class, is superfluous to modern media engagement. A rich man may be able to afford a token original soup can painting, but the common man can experience the same thing through reproduction. The elite and common folk converge in media engagement upon the same field of experience. Regular people do not have to take exhaustive pilgrimages to view fine art in public museums, and the elite participate in folk art when they step into a movie theater or simply open up their streaming service of choice. Fine art is becoming folk, and folk art is becoming fine. The distinction between folk and fine art was best understood through the medium of music. Symphonies are musically sophisticated and require a large team of musicians to actualize, whereas folk music plays off of simple chord progressions and is participatory. But music technology has eliminated the formal characteristics of this distinction and has allowed music to develop in a slew of directions with diverse musical properties. There is now a continuum of musical features explored in the wide range of dissolving musical genres. The Beatles made simple, catchy songs, but they also enriched their music with subtle depth and novel techniques. As Paul McCartney once said,
"Pop music is the classical music of now."
Electric instruments can fill the auditory space once only able to be made complete by the orchestra. Can the music of progressive bands such as Tool or King Crimson truly be considered folk when it harnesses odd time signatures and exotic modes? The canon of music is now populated by institutions like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which asserts a canon consisting entirely of what would traditionally be considered folk music. Even if the elites do not accept rock as a fine art, they do today agree that jazz music is worthy of attention and cultural elevation, but jazz has humble origins in common folk. Beyond the folk-fine distinction, there is also the antiquated distinction between pure art and applied/commercial art. The idea of pure art ignores the fact that all media is subject to modes of patronage. No piece of media exists outside the bounds of an underlying economic medium. Theater is now considered a fine art, largely due to its preservation as a token of live performance, distinguished from the mass-produced medium of film. But the social status of theater is entirely the product of economics, and is quite divorced from its content or history. Skilled classical composers of the past had to waste their efforts on opera as a means of making money, far askew of pure ambitions. Traditionally, visual artists could find work in painting portraits and decorative still lifes due to the mode of patronage that existed before the advent of photographic production. The canon of visual art is saturated with religious imagery, but this is only due to the goals of the patrons who could afford to commission visual art. The actual depth and variety of visual content possible by the medium was not afforded by the patronage systems of the past. We will never know what the great artists of history might have conjured up if they truly could pursue pure art. The School of Athens by Raphael is evidence that messages beyond the tropes of religion can be expressed to great effect if so commissioned, although even this piece was ultimately a part of a larger religious program. Many secular subjects worthy of artistic enshrinement were untapped until media technology advanced beyond the confines of traditional patronage. What little cultural influence fine art now has over society is utterly replaced by what is conventionally considered commercial art through the technological and social democratization of media. When society is flooded with media images, what need is there of the token fine art piece to communicate with the public and preserve history? Communication is the goal of media, even when reduced only to the disinterested communication of aesthetic form. Design is the medium of artistic communication, and every form of media must integrate design if it is to mean anything in the electric age. As Bruno Munari writes, "The designer is therefore the artist of today, not because he is a genius, but because he works in such a way as to re-establish contact between art and the public, because he has the humility and ability to respond to whatever demand is made of him by the society in which he lives, because he knows his job and the ways and means of solving each problem of design." Media services interests, and in the modern world, interests are public, interconnected, and commercial. Media is always applied, even if that application is museum viewership. But application is how media gets embedded within mediums that people can actually engage with. The global village demands mass-produced media that extends the human form to solve problems that only design can solve. There is great artistry in the design of toasters and vacuum cleaners to communicate their function through aesthetic and practical means, and when someone vacuums their house, they are having an aesthetic experience aided by that design. But even without functionality, art is subservient to design as a tool for design. The artwork featured on Pokémon cards broadcasts communicatively in how it is embedded within the overall card and broader media franchise, and because of this, receives more meaningful public attention and aesthetic engagement than a disembodied painting on a wall. The rise of design led Munari to proclaim that art is once more becoming a trade, because art, if it is to exist meaningfully, must embrace design as the communication medium of the economic structures of modernity. The shifting tides of historical development has also erased the traditional means by which artists are elevated into masters of a canon. Contemporary orchestral music has been unable to elevate masters since John Cage progressed the medium into the silence of 433. Contemporary concert music has no masters, or even celebrities, outside of the context of film, which is distinctly an applied form. This is not entirely new, as opera composers serve the purpose of entertainment similar to modern film composers. However, film lacks the cultural elevation which is retrospectively applied to opera. Contemporary visual art similarly has no masters. Modernism widely explored the affordances of the painting medium, such that little is left to contemporary visual artists who wish to progress the medium. This is why many contemporary artists employ shock value and gimmicky concepts to desperately reach into the untapped potential of the medium. Additionally, fine artists have to publish their work on the equalizing medium of social media, if they wish to gain prolificity, no different than the amateur. The categories are the means by which experience is transformed into media, and when media objects become entities, they can be critiqued and analyzed for their aesthetic value. Media criticism is divided into two dispositions of analysis. There is the aesthetic disposition and the normative disposition. These dispositions are the way in which the relational nature of a media entity can be assessed as judgments. Judgments are always about the relational features presented by and in the media experience. Dewey describes the relations in art with, in art, as in nature and in life, relations are modes of interaction. They are pushes and pulls. They are contractions and expansions. They determine lightness and weight, rising and falling, harmony and discord. Media entities are relations in that they relate composite elements and are also relations in that they relate to the viewing agent. Judgments occur when relations are considered together to form a greater totality. Normativity is how a media entity is judged in relation to the polar axis of good and bad. It is the mark of the amateur critic to over-rely on their normative disposition. The amateur critic wants to express their normative assessment of a piece of media, and in doing so, lacks meaningful communicative description of the entity that would inform their audience of the actual nature of the media. To say a work of media is good says nothing about its nature. Words like sublime or exquisite are more valuable, not because of their normativity, but because of the descriptive connotation embedded in their normativity. A sublime piece of art is not just good, but is a metaphysically elevated form of good. Exquisite works of art are not just good, they are descriptively elegant and fine. Normativity is not descriptive and therefore lacks value in criticism unless paired with description. The aesthetic disposition is characterized by the presence of tonality. The analytic approach to art and media, like that of Kant, restricts aesthetics to pleasure and beauty. But this denotation conflates aesthetics with normativity, which should be treated as a separate relational disposition. Pleasure and beauty are always considered to be good by classical aestheticians, which mistreats aesthetics as essentially normative. In the analytic approach, media cannot be appreciated outside of valuative assessment, even though in practice, media is appreciated by many people for their diversity of affective relations. For this reason, the speculative approach adopted here reclaims aesthetic relationality as the plurality of tonal possibilities that exist with autonomy apart from normativity. Consider the sentence, "The cat is on the mat." This sentence is descriptive, but not overtly aesthetic, unless heavily projected upon, because of its lack of tonal character. Aesthetics is applied to a media piece through interpretation and phenomenal acquisition, in which tonal relations are discovered within the media. The sentence can be refined as, "The orange pussycat rests quietly upon her bed." This sentence is both more aesthetic and more descriptive. The qualia of color provides a clearer visual image. The situational tone of tranquility is presented through the quietude, and the mat is contextualized with affordance as the bed. These features enhance the aesthetic value of the sentence by providing relations that can be absorbed by the viewer. Tonality is closely related to description, but presents more relational content from which to form judgments. The sentence, "Numbers divisible by 2 are even," is purely descriptive and lacks tone that would prompt aesthetic engagement. Tonal description is the most important aspect of media criticism because it informs the audience of the felt character of the media from which they can estimate normativity of their own without having directly experienced the media. The foundation of media criticism is description. Description presents the facts of the media, which is the basis for all subsequent engagement. Next, aesthetic tonality shows the personal effects of the media and describes how the media was received by the critic. The last element of criticism is normativity, which assesses the tonality of the media experience in terms of value. Any one element alone is insufficient for a quality critique. Media criticism can be aided with the help of a tool called the wheel of relation. In the abstract version presented here, the wheel of relation is a circular diagram consisting of 8 points that gradate into a circle of tonal affects that also feature polar relations of opposing elements. At the top of the wheel is expansion, and at the bottom is contraction. Expansion is a relation of outward movement that can be seen both in the elements of a piece of media and in the affect it evokes in the viewer. Contraction is the opposite of this, which moves inward. When an expansionary work of media is acquired by a viewer, it can be processed into joy, delight, and vitality, amongst other analogous terms. This is the relation that traditional aestheticians focus on and often abuse by projecting normativity onto. Contraction can become sorrow, isolation, or pity when processed by cognition. Traditional aestheticians find the popular appreciation of tragedy to be a source of confusion and paradox because of their faulty theories of the aesthetic. Sadness is a tone of experience and is therefore valuable aesthetically, no different from that which causes happiness. The horizontal axis of the wheel of relation allots entropy to the left and negentropy to the right. Entropy is the relation of chaos and disorder. When processed, it can become disarray, shame, or dissonance. Negentropy is its opposite, which is characterized by order. Negentropy can become harmony, pride, or awe. This axis also demonstrates a flaw of conventional aesthetic theory. When beauty is analyzed in terms of its relational content, it can be seen as a negentropic ordering of elements. It is not useful to project normativity upon negentropy, as entropic relations are just as valuable as tonal experiences. For example, distorted guitar has an entropic timbre that facilitates a variety of applications in music and is the hallmark sound of rock. Between expansion and negentropy is connection. Connection can be processed into peace, comfort, or unity. Between negentropy and contraction is release. Release can be processed into ease, serenity, or catharsis. Between contraction and entropy is disconnection, which can be processed into fear, discomfort, or thrill. Between entropy and expansion is tension, which can be processed into anger, drive, or anxiety. These four terms are the secondary relations of a media entity, and they provide a more subtle and nuanced palette for describing the relations of media. At the center of the wheel of relation is stillness. Media is an experience, and experiences are processes. As Dewey writes, an instantaneous experience is an impossibility, biologically and psychologically. An experience is a product, one might almost say a byproduct, of the continuous and cumulative interaction of an organic self with the world. A media experience is never truly still, as the relational makeup of a media experience involves the active engagement of one's cognition. But as engagement subsides, when an agent disengages with their media experience, the media's relational content disintegrates into a lack. Outward movement on the wheel corresponds to a saturation of tonal experience. People often favor highly saturated media, but there is also value to be found in more understated media. The wheel of relation is paired with its normative counterpart, the axis of normativity. The axis is comprised of desire in the positive slot and antipathy in the negative slot. To positively assess a media entity is to desire it as an experience. Media is always interested, and the relational faculty of desire is the basis for interest. Desire can be processed into love, obsession, or appreciation. Antipathy can be processed into hate, rejection, or depreciation. People conventionally are averse to media judged negatively, but both desire and antipathy are necessary for a complete toolset of media criticism. Media entities become experiences when a viewing agent participates in the experience through awareness. Awareness is the transform point on which the participant finds themselves within the media experience. When someone positively assesses a media entity, their awareness moves towards the positive normative point. When someone experiences the tone of expansion, their awareness moves towards the top of the wheel of relation. Both the wheel of relation and the axis of normativity are affordances of the logical structure of human thought. When comparing elements, a relation is created, and relations structurate elements through axial forms. In its most simple form, two elements can be related through a connection, which can be represented as a line. A line may signify different kinds of relation, but the structure of the relation is that of the line's form. This system takes advantage of two possible axial relations, that of the linear axis for normativity and the gradated axis for aesthetics. The linear axis is what allows for the possibility of normativity, as normativity has the structure of polarity of good and bad. Without the mind's faculty of relational structuring, normativity would not be sensible. The linear axis spreads divergently apart through itself because it is continuous indefinitely, but there also exists the possibility of a gradation in which the values populating the axis loop in on themselves like a color wheel. This relation is modular and allows for radiality, well suited to expressing the continuous range of tonality in aesthetics. A media entity is a sign that prompts signification within the viewing agent, and elements within the entity are themselves signs that collectively form relations. The linear assortment of signs is called a syntam. Syntagms are most relevant to the medium of language, in which each word is a sign that contributes to a linear sentence, which is itself embedded syntagmatically in a paragraph. This relation can also be heard in simple melodies, which concatenate notes in a series. Most mediums, however, present signs in a non-linear relation. A painting can be considered a lateral syntagm, in that its elements form a synchronic whole that can be viewed in any order. To facilitate the possibility of any kind of sign relations within a piece of media, we can view a media entity as a syntagmesh, a mesh of signs that can interrelate in any arbitrary pattern within the media experience. The theory presented here can now be utilized for practical application. The first syntagmesh we will consider is The Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. As a post-impressionist work, The Starry Night makes exquisite use of color, divergent from veridical perception. The saturated blues are vibrant modalities that saturate their degree in such a way as to grab the viewer's attention and fill them with pleasant sense impressions. The yellow of the sunlit moon is the complement of the dominant blues, which make them pop. But the dark colors of the foreground add additional contrast that grounds the painting. The qualia is arranged in human and fluent swirling strokes that resist geometric shape in their definition. The transforms of the stars in the sky are splattered on the canvas as if haphazardly, but undeniably communicate intention in how they evade the central swirl of light blue sky. The overall composition is not quite conforming to the rule of thirds. The mountain is defined a little too far to the left, and the sun is defined a little too far to the upper right. But this is not unintentional, as the shape of the composition gives breathing room to the central elements. A unique feature of Impressionism is the thick use of paint. When viewing a Van Gogh in person, subtle materiality oozes from the canvas, which gives the pigment material a three-dimensional definition. On the Wheel of Relation, this piece invokes a high degree of expansion in the joyous play of line and color, but also has a cooling effect indicative of release. The blues ease the mind and situate the viewer in the calm yet vital scenery. There is connection between the harmonized elements and a tinge of melancholy. With this descriptive and tonal assessment, the piece deserves to receive the highest degree of normative valuation. Few media pieces like this one cement their place in the canon with more unpretentious authority. To contrast that syntagmesh, we will consider a work in the medium of graphic design. The Priester Matches poster of Lucien Bernhard is a minimalist design consisting of two iconic matches placed below logographic typography, all situated over a dark background with a light border. The qualia of the piece is bold, as the flat, saturated colors provoke attention, especially when contrasting off of the background. While not necessarily geometric, the shapes comprising the composition are simple. The text is playful in its compression and sense of gesture, but is not childish. The material of the piece, as it is intended to be experienced, does not feature the token character of authentic paint like The Starry Night, because as a graphic application, it is mass-produced for the purpose of advertised finality. The piece affords buying the matches it advertises. The viewer does not experience happiness, sadness, anger, or fear towards the matches, but instead is filled with a simple and full harmony. The work is dominantly negentropic, complemented by a connection of its simple elements. While I would not normatively judge it as enthusiastically positive as The Starry Night, it is highly pleasant and instills a desire both for viewership and for the matches themselves. Next, we will analyze an untitled piece by Jean Arp. This abstract syntagmesh is a collage of blue and light gray squares placed upon a middle gray background. The focus of this piece, as a collage, is the transform and definition of the arranged elements. Each element is a square, but the way they are defined leaves the edges dissonantly serrated. The overall effect is harmonious, but the edges are a textural entropy. Part of the value of the piece is the contrast between the macro-level order and the micro-level chaos. The material is construction paper rather than paint, and the composition was derived from chance as the cutouts were thrown down as if discarded upon the canvas. Random chance is the efficiency of the piece. Construction paper features a noticeable paper texture across the whole picture plane, which is another source of subtle entropy, although it also contributes to the cohesiveness of the image as a whole. The color tones are almost neutral, but the grays are cool, which has a predominantly calming effect evident of release. This piece makes the viewer relax their muscles in sympathy with the energy emanating from it and invites them into the work with welcoming embrace. Untitled is a personal favorite and deserves the highest degree of normative valuation. The last syntag mesh we will consider is the infamous Fountain by Marcel Duchamp. Fountain is a urinal. It is almost just a urinal. While just a urinal is in fact media, this urinal is situated in exhibitory context as a fine art piece. Duchamp challenged the affordances of exhibition admission by submitting such a work that denies the assumptions of the analytic approach to art. The urinal may, in a sense, be considered a statue, because its dominant feature is its materiality. But unlike traditional sculpture, the efficiency of the piece is not located in the artist himself. As a ready-made, the physical object was the product of industrial production that was never intended to be treated as art. In fact, the original intention was to afford pissing. The purpose of the piece was to facilitate urinary excretion, but the finality of this individual urinal became aesthetic viewership. The strength of Fountain is the role it played in art history as part of the Dada movement, but without consideration for its historical and conceptual value, it is not particularly pleasing. The emotional effect of viewing the piece is that of dissociation. The conflict between its intended function and its artistic contextualization creates a dissonance that is hard to resolve. The way Duchamp signed the piece with vandal-like typography only heightens the disconnect the audience receives from it. For these reasons, this is the first media piece that does not receive a positive normative judgment. This connection can be positively evaluated if utilized appropriately, but Fountain's value only truly exists within its historical impact. When experimental media has progressed and expanded so much since Duchamp's day, it is hard to appreciate Fountain as more than a gimmick. My critique of these syntag meshes may not be identical to your own, but should be treated as one possible interpretation derived from personal experience of the pieces. Because media is an experience, critique is always personal. The goal of universal or absolute judgments of media is not only impossible, but not even to be desired. Critics are curators of experience, and the value of media criticism lies in the connection between the critic and audience. Critique that feigns neutrality not only does not accurately reflect the experience of the critic, but appeals to no one in particular by trying to appeal to everyone. Critique that is personalized to the critic allows for audiences to find critics that align with their own dispositions of experience. Audiences should curate the critics who they in turn receive curation from. Through description, aesthetics, and normativity, if combined with intention, the critic can effectively communicate their experiences to those who may or may not share in that experience when engaging with the media for themselves. Despite being non-universalizable, media critique is a matter of argumentation. In communicating experience, critique argues for its own validity through narrative. Elements within a media entity exist in relation to each other, then to the observer or critic, and then to the audience of criticism. The communicativity of these relationships is the basis for narrativity. When elements of a media entity play with each other within the process of experience, they construct a narrative that resonates with the viewer. Arguments are felt, including logical arguments. Logical arguments string together elements, and they rely on truth values to tell a story. Even logical arguments are only accepted when they resonate or are compatible with a gut feeling. The affective state of the gut feeling evaluates how the content and form of an argument correspond to the narrativity of life experiences and developed dispositions towards a meaning. Logic is a syntax for narrative. Gut feeling corresponds to phenomenal existence, which must be affirmed even in the face of calculated logic. Logic and Cartesian doubt lead to solipsism, But narrative informs us to live a different story. Belief in and action in accordance with the existence of the external world is an irrational narrative by which we live. We live this way because it resonates with us, even if it is only a comfort afforded by narrative. A critic can argue endlessly for the validity of their experience, but the root of their assessment is a felt resonance with the media. No one can force someone into agreeing with their aesthetic judgments, but narrative argumentation can move a person towards the conditions by which they will experience the same type of resonance the critic felt. Media that is classified as art proper is more directly conducive to narrative resonance, which is why media engagement is so heavily aimed at the analytic approach to aesthetics. But all kinds of media can induce resonance, and conventional art is only one medium that facilitates resonance. For example, humor appeals most directly to resonance because the argumentative truth of a joke receives its validity from reactionary laughter. Laughter is never a choice. A joke cannot be a lie. The relativity of aesthetic judgment is not to say that all argumentation is subjective in the traditional sense of the word. While I do not deny that there might be an objective logic and objective truth to the world, it is pure narrative to believe that humans have access to it. In the Platonic dialogue Protagoras, Socrates asks the sophist Protagoras how virtue can be taught, to which he responds, "Would you rather that I explain by telling you a story, as an older man to a younger audience, or by developing an argument?" When Socrates does not choose an option, Protagoras opts for telling a story. He proceeds to recount the myth of Prometheus and Epimetheus, in which wisdom and shame are distributed to the human race so that cities and politics can be erected. For Protagoras, unlike Socrates, the narrativity of myth is as valid a form of argumentation as logic. Both narrative and logic require resonance and in this way persuade. Western culture and philosophy developed into an obsession with the logos that undermines the resonant wisdom of myth and narrative that inform through aesthetics. A story, as a media entity no different from a logical argument, can be true when it resonates with truth. Mythology organizes a society upon an aesthetic base that serves as a premise for developing wisdom. Patterns in aesthetic judgment constitute a person's taste. Taste is never directed at a particular media entity, but is found within the relations among judgments over time. Generalizing taste is as futile as sharing experiences, because media experience is a phenomenon upon the phenomenal field, which is strictly private and overseen directly by the I. Universalizing taste is the vain endeavor of the analytic approach to aesthetics, exemplified by Kant, who writes, "Everyone has his own taste." This would be equivalent to saying that there is no such thing as taste, i.e., no aesthetic judgment capable of making a rightful claim upon the assent of everyone. Media is an experience, and therefore has a nominal existence. The media token is actuated in an individual experience, and the experience is what is aesthetic. Universalizing taste ignores the nominal instantiation of experience in favor of judgments of the type. But the type is never the experience because it is only the origin of the token and is never itself instantiated. Because each media experience is nominal in nature, taste should be found within the media experience and its relation to other experiences. Taste is personal, but that is not to say that everyone has good taste. Some people engage with media in shallow ways, in which they do not deeply process the elements of the media together into a resonant whole, while others find great meaning in media which reverberates throughout their life. Good taste is a matter of engagement. Mere viewership is not engagement. Engagement involves letting a media entity argue with oneself through its narrative, forming relations, and taking the conclusions of that argument into life as a new means of greater and continuous engagement. Media that does not change who one is does not extend beyond the impression of the experience and into life. One must carry the weight of their media history and let it inform their actions. Taste is involved in both the reception and production of media, An artist must have taste in order to discriminate their ideas and actuate the best entities for personal and audience resonance. An artist at work is engaged in a way that is different from media perception. They touch their instruments and move their body in union with the entity being created. There is artistry beyond just the creation of art. Dewey writes, "The intelligent mechanic engaged in his job, interested in doing well and finding satisfaction in his handiwork, caring for his materials and tools with genuine affection, is artistically engaged." Artistry and taste can be found when someone cooks a meal or cleans their home. Any act of creation is an opportunity for aesthetic engagement, and even non-creative acts can be received as they are acted so as to be aesthetic experiences. It may seem obvious, given the efforts dedicated here to aesthetic theory, but it should be questioned why people create media to begin with. The difficulty of this question rests upon the fact that media creation is work. Outside of industry, which is the primary source of publicly consumed media generation, even pleasant creationary acts are work. Creation expends energy as the capacity for work. It takes work to create, for example, a video game, but engaging with that product of work is itself work, even as aesthetic experience. Video games simulate work by requiring the completion of tasks aggregating towards achieving virtual goals. The gamer has an aesthetic experience simultaneously with and in part because of this work. While work can be aesthetic and pleasurable in certain contexts, historical progression has developed towards eliminating and automating work. What can justify the act of creation? People desire to have a payoff for their time and energy invested into media creation. Even in video games, where the player works within their aesthetic experience, they expect digital rewards for their efforts. One approach to justifying creation is to measure success in terms of metrics. This is a direction that is encouraged in the electric age, in which social media is the medium containing media. Social media within capitalism is profit-driven, and profit motivates applications to be designed so as to exploit validation received by quantitative metrics. But how many views or clicks or impressions justify the work of creation? If a media entity is viewed collectively for longer than it took to create, does that outweigh the cost of creating it? The problem with quantitative justification is that it justifies without regard for taste. A million views is not as valuable as a single engagement. Artists should validate their work with the effects it has on individual audience members. Deep engagement changes the viewer's life, as the media is absorbed into their thought patterns and informs their interactions with the world. Engagement does not have to be found in others for the creative work to be justified, as the artist can be the audience of their own work. Creating media strengthens creative muscles and formalizes ideas into actuality, and that actuality, as a media entity, can provide valuable aesthetic experience for when the artist engages with their own work. Recent technological developments have brought the problem of work to the fore because of the advent of generative artificial intelligence. AI can generate a media entity nearly instantaneously with no more work required of the artist than writing a prompt. It is easy to justify the work involved in generating AI media because it is so minor. Current AI models are not capable of generating deeply complex and meaningful media entities, but are more than capable of more simple tasks, such as generating aesthetically pleasing images. But as technology progresses further, it is inevitable that AI models will become more creative and sophisticated and will be able to generate media on par with great artists. Humans have demonstrated that they are not satisfied with the work it takes to create media and cannot sufficiently justify creation. This drives innovation in automative technology. AI is striking in how it can generate media entities so effortlessly, but these advancements have been in progress for all of human history. Classical composers had to invest extensive effort into practicing their instruments, becoming fluent in notation and sight reading, and had to compose music at the piano without knowing how a piece will sound in its final form. Now music composition is tied to music production in which the digital audio workstation streamlines and automates much of the work involved in music creation. With MIDI programming, a composer can actuate an electronic performance simultaneously with composing, and even recorded music benefits from reamp boxes, which allows for guitar parts to be captured and edited before recording. The artists of the past sacrificed themselves for the work they bequeathed to progeny. If technological progress is infinite in scope, and humanity doesn't destroy itself, automation will reach the point where artists are superfluous to media. If an AI can generate a Hollywood blockbuster with a single prompt, what economic incentives will exist to justify traditional film production, which can cost hundreds of millions of dollars? Hollywood films in their current state may as well be written by AIs, given the economic incentive to appeal to the lowest common denominator of generic and generalized taste. Even if society reaches the point of an automated media utopia, the technology that fuels such a society is developed off of the historical artists who explored and developed the landscape of media within possibility space. Apart from the efficient means of media development, if automated media generators continue to be structured similarly to how they are now, they will rely upon a database of media, which extends through the history of preserved tokens. Dead artists are the ghosts, or as I prefer, angels, in the machine of automated media generation. Long dead artists unknowingly sacrifice themselves through work to provide the basis for the future of media generation. There is a risk of transforming art angels into art ghosts. An AI can generate variations of media tokens ad infinitum, such that the original type becomes lost in a sea of creations. A Bach composition, which is a type, can be altered note by note, or with alternate modes, or keys, or arrangements, until no one cares for the original outside of historical interest. If the humanity of media is to be valued, art angels should be treated with reverence and with an appreciation for the work expended in creating the world of today and tomorrow. Otherwise, they become ghosts. The nature of automation and generative artificial intelligence calls into question what it takes to create media. For Kant, art is created through genius. Genius is the innate mental aptitude through which nature gives the rule to art. For him, genius is not an accidental feature of the artist, as he writes that fine arts must necessarily be regarded as arts of genius. Genius is conceptualized primarily in terms of originality. Kant would likely disqualify AI-generated art from the status of fine art because, in its current form, AI is a pattern-recognizing and predicting machine. There is a limit to the creativity and originality of artificial media, but the theory of genius is empty like the analytic approach to aesthetics. Because everything can be art, it is incidental whether or not an art product is sourced from genius or even a human at all. A flower presents its aesthetic beauty without any hand or mind behind its creation. An artist behind a piece of media is a matter of speculation. Whether or not a media entity was made by a human has no bearing on the finality of the entity and the experience it evokes. A human agent is merely one kind of efficiency amongst many equally valid causes. The speculative approach to media appreciates media entities as an autonomous unity without regard for contingencies of creation. Additionally, Kant's view that the actions of genius are inexplicable is an insult to the extensive body of art theory, especially music theory, which informs creative acts. Dewey emphasizes the role of expression in the creation of artworks. For him, mere outbursts or reactions, like a baby crying, are not truly expressive because there is no creative impulse behind the action. In semiotic terms, expression requires signification. But expression, like genius, is accidental to the media entity. The untitled piece by Jean Arp discussed earlier is evidence of this. The collage was created by random chance. The artist found the discarded elements in a composition after having discarded them, only to realize later their expressive effect. If a masterpiece of originality like that can be created through blind forces, like that of the media of nature, then intentionality and genius are only drivers of media creation, but are in no way essential to it. This is the value of the speculative approach to aesthetics, which sees media entities and their experiences for what they are. The theory presented in this work bears the fruit of deep media engagement and appreciation. The speculative approach to aesthetics widens the range of what is considered art to the maximum scope, and nested within it is the language game of media, which illuminates the structuring principles of medium and message and their internal relations. Media entities are understood through the categories and the wheel of relation, which provide a tool set for media analysis and critique. Speculative aesthetics avoids the wrong-headedness of traditional aesthetic theories in favor of phenomenological, semiotic, and dialectical insights. If you have any suggestions for improvement or want to suggest topics for analysis, feel free to comment below or reach out to me. A downloadable PDF version of this essay is available on my Patreon. This has been Ryan9. Thank you for watching.